coming in from Mexico into the United States. For the first time in more than 2 decades, Mexico overtook China as the largest importer of goods to the U.S. Mexican goods imported to the U.S. totaled $475 billion in 2023, about $20 billion higher than the previous year. During that same period, Chinese goods imported to the U.S. came to $427 billion, $110 billion less than the year prior, and imports from Mexico are still climbing. In the first 8 months of this year, U.S. imports from Mexico reached $334 billion, 5.8% higher than the same period in 2023. Fueling that trend are simmering trade tensions between Beijing and Washington, an effort to bring U.S. imports closer to home, and a burgeoning Mexican manufacturing base. But there's another factor at play. To avoid American tariffs, Chinese companies are using Mexico as a backdoor to the U.S. With what you're moving within Mexico itself, the finished product, how much of those Chinese goods actually stay in Mexico, and how much, roughly, do you think those Chinese products come here to the United States?
I think there's a huge market for Chinese product in Mexico, but the big ticket item here is the U.S. market. That's why China's coming to Mexico.
What we're trying to do is bring stuff from all over the world to Mexico, manufacture here, and send it again abroad.
Chinese car companies, for example, are setting up shop in Mexico. Tariffs on Chinese goods date back to 2018, when the Trump administration launched a trade war with China. To take advantage of the Mexican trade, logistics companies like Maersk, DHL, and Uber Freight are ramping up their investments on both sides of the border. Companies are coming to Texas. It's a wild, wild west, where they are buying up land to secure warehouse space. At the center of it all is U.S. Customs and Border Protection, one of the world's largest law enforcement agencies with over 60,000 employees.
We will do a complete inspection on it, from instruments of terror to narcotics to country of origin to manifest discrepancies, everything.
More than 650,000 cargo trucks crossed the Isleta-Zaragoza Bridge in El Paso, Texas in 2022. So how is China able to circumvent U.S. tariffs? And what are logistics companies doing to prepare for the upcoming boom in Mexican trade? CNBC traveled to Mexico City and El Paso to find out.
Is it time? As you wish. The anima are restless.
In an effort to avoid U.S. tariffs, Chinese companies are moving their raw materials and operations to Mexico. Jordan Dewart is the president of cross-border logistics company Redwood Mexico. In addition to this 100,000 square foot warehouse in El Paso, the company also has about 200 employees in Mexico. How has the landscape changed since the start of the Trump trade war when it comes to Chinese manufacturing?
Well, it's no secret there was a lot of pressure on Chinese companies after those trade wars. And I think we saw immediately an opportunity for Chinese companies to move to Mexico to kind of catch this nearshoring wave.
Ocean container data tracked by freight analytics firms Eneta backs that up.
We have seen 18 months in a row now with ever increasing, basically all-time high monthly imports from China to Mexico.
Container traffic from China to Mexico has surged in recent years. From January to August 2024, China to Mexico container trade was up by 22% from the year prior. That's on top of container trade along the same route in 2023, up 33% from 2022. At the same time, China's container trade to the U.S. has slowed down.
You see an ever-growing trend into Mexico. I think that's pretty clear to me that something is going on here. Someone is preparing for something, and it's not all going into Mexico consumers.
VesselBot, which also tracks container flows, shows the 3-month period from April to June recorded the highest volumes of Mexico exports to the U.S. this year. The North American Free Trade Agreement, implemented in 1994, eliminated most tariffs between the three countries. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, which replaced NAFTA, went into effect 4 years ago. The agreement is up for renewal in 2026, and a focal point of those talks is expected to be trade with China.
We answer the call.
Chinese companies, if they import directly into the United States, they are faced with tariffs. If they bring their goods into Mexico and those goods are improved upon or some value added to them, they then qualify for the USMCA.
In terms of what you have to do to have a product that's labeled Mexican as opposed to Chinese in origin, you have to substantially transform it, which means it has to become a different product. So if I get a whole set of wooden boards, I turn that into a desk, I have substantially transformed that product. It has to change customs categories.
Changing a product's economic nationality or origin of goods means it can swap a Made in China label to a Made in Mexico one. An estimated $3.7 billion of Chinese foreign direct investments was made in Mexico in 2023, significantly higher than the previous decades. The Hafusan Industrial Park, 25 miles north of Monterrey, Mexico, is one example of that investment and is now home to at least 30 Chinese firms. In the past 3 years, 9 Chinese car companies, including BYD and Chery, have set up operations in Mexico. What are you moving within Mexico? Is it more components to manufacturing plants?
I think Chinese companies, when they established themselves in Mexico, they were bringing finished goods in. Now they've moved on to raw materials, component parts.
Backdoor has a connotation that they're doing something wrong. Just because you see a Mexican manufacturer using Chinese inputs does not mean that they're violating any rules of origin.
Hostility research tier complete. The anima are restless. What's on your mind?
Simon Cohen is the founder and CEO of Henco, a logistics company that got its start in Monterrey, Mexico in 1998.
The facility that we have behind us, it's one of the 6 facilities that we have in Mexico City. What we do here is we receive raw materials and finished goods from abroad. We tag them, we label them, we pack them, we repack them, and we deliver it to the distribution centers or final consumer.
The company has about 1,000 employees, and in addition to its facilities in Mexico City, it has 2 others in Monterrey and another 2 coming online later this year. Roughly 20 to 30% of the goods here are shipped to the U.S., according to Cohen.
The north part of Mexico is getting invaded with foreign investment, and people are coming from all over the world, from Asia, from Europe, from South America, even from Africa, and they are trying to build plants and manufacturing facilities to enter the United States market.
Not only are the Chinese setting up shop in Mexico with manufacturing plants, so are the European companies. They are moving their product away from China and they're setting up shop in Mexico. Some of the top 10 companies importing into Mexico in 2024 include European companies like Pirelli Tires and SKF, a Swedish auto parts maker, as well as Tesla and General Motors. One key advantage? Labor is often cheaper in Mexico than China, but its proximity to the U.S. might be its biggest advantage. The U.S. and Mexico share a 2,000-mile border with 47 active land ports of entry. Roughly 6 million U.S. jobs depend on trade with Mexico. The U.S. is also Mexico's largest export market. Mexican manufacturing represents about 40% of the country's $1.3 trillion economy. The 2 countries also share a unique relationship when it comes to trade. During the cycle of production, materials and parts often cross the southwest border numerous times while U.S. and Mexican factories work together to produce a good. As a result, 40% of the value of U.S. imports from Mexico are made of content produced in the U.S. Cars built in North America are believed to cross U.S. borders, including the border with Canada, 8 times as they are being produced. That means, unlike imports from China, a large portion of the money U.S. consumers spend on Mexican imports goes back to U.S. companies and workers.
Going back 30, 40 years, Mexico manufactured t-shirts and tequila. Now we're seeing much more sophisticated products, from engines for airplanes, aerospace, automotive, electric vehicles.
Mexico produces 3.5 million vehicles annually. 76% of those are destined for the U.S. market. The top 10 commodities traded between Mexico and the U.S. in June 2024 were vehicles, computers, and electrical machinery. But there are roadblocks ahead. Tesla announced in 2023 it was investing about $5 billion in a new factory in the northern Mexican city of Monterrey. However, that plan was put on hold after former President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 100% tariff on vehicles made in Mexico. Other headwinds facing companies investing in Mexico include security, worker availability, water scarcity, and Mexico's economic policies.
What is the biggest threat to the nearshoring boom? Politics, tariffs.
If tariffs are placed on Chinese goods, that will absolutely thwart the plan of these Chinese companies to backdoor their way into the U.S. through the USMCA agreement. It will have a huge impact on those companies specifically.
Juarez, one of Mexico's largest cities with about 1.6 million residents, is home to roughly 300 maquiladoras, or factories that take raw material and assemble them into finished products for foreign companies.
To show you just how close we are to Mexico, right behind me is downtown El Paso. And a few miles away, 2 highways over, is Juarez, Mexico. And that's where the manufacturing facilities are located.
For most trucks leaving Juarez, their first stop, Customs and Border Protection officers on the El Paso side of the border.
Buenos días. ¿Qué llevamos hoy, jefe? Ok, la calle Rojas. ¿En cabina no llevas nada para declarar? Una hielera con aguas y un lonche. ¿Todo en orden ahí? ¿No llevas acompañantes, nada ilegal? Ok, muy bien.
Auden Ramos has been with the CBP for 27 years.
What we have officers doing up on our primary lane is checking all the trucks as they're walking by them to see if there's any anomalies, any changes made to that truck. Has an air tank been tampered, modified? Have the rear doors of the trailer been opened without breaking the seal?
On an average weekday, 2,430 trucks pass through this border. Most truck drivers make the trip 2 to 3 times a day. In addition to narcotics, human trafficking, and terrorism, officers of the Anti-Terrorism Contraband Enforcement Team and their colleagues are looking at the products being transported and their country of origin.
We're looking where the product was made, where the final point of manufacture was, and that's what will determine country of origin. For these engines that we have behind us, not every single piece of the engine may have been manufactured in Mexico, but that's where the final assembly and it was put together at was in Mexico.
Trucks are also checked by canine units, and drivers have their manifests vetted by officers. If an officer notices an irregularity, the truck could be sent for an X-ray exam or have its cargo offloaded for further inspection. The Isleta Crossing on the edge of El Paso, where this border is located, is the second largest after Laredo, Texas, for Mexico and U.S. trade. According to Ramos, it takes a trailer less than 30 minutes to clear U.S. Customs. But as we found out, the return trip to Mexico can take much longer.
In terms of the Mexican trade, we're looking at the volumes. We were at the border, and the line of trucks heading back went on for miles. Why are